Okay, so James Pitko is probably not the most gifted pool player in Georgia. But luckily, that isn't his major claim to fame. Instead, he's the first major demographer of the World Wide Web. For Jim Pitko and fellow graduate student Colleen Kehoe, who also isn't expected to turn pool into a career, have been spending a lot of time recently getting a handle on just who is moving into cyberspace and what they're doing when they get there, finding out how people are adjusting to their new life on the internet.
In a network of computers, it's not the MIPS and chips and whatnot that's most important. It's what goes on between the people using them that makes them really powerful. A reminder from Sun Microsystems, proud to support this PBS program.
I'm Scott Simon. Every week, more and more people are moving through a new territory called the Internet. Millions of people who are working, learning, visiting, or just playing there. Now, as the place gets more populated, we may wonder, what kind of people are we living online with? Well, now we're going to meet a few. These are the faces behind the computer screens. People who are painting a whole new picture of life on the Internet.
This week, like last week, at least another million people around the world will start using the internet. A million new people joining a population that's already larger than most nations. There seems to be no end to it. We are suddenly looking at the largest interactive, connected community in the history of the human race, a whole new migration for at least a while each day into a virtual continent of information. And what all the advertisers, the bankers, the statisticians, the power brokers, and for that matter, just as curious normal folk want to know is, just who exactly are all these new immigrants? What do they look like? What do they do? Where do they live? What do we have in common with them? And how are we all going to change the culture and personality of the net? When it comes to the World Wide Web, it is Jim Pitko in Atlanta who has most of the answers.
The typical user is in their 30s that uses computers at work as well as at home for fun. There seems to be this dual use for work and for fun. They tend to have a good amount of discretionary income, and they typically enjoy and will actively seek out the experience of being on the web and also the internet.
As a doctoral student at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, Mr. Pitko was doing his PhD in something called human-computer interaction, looking into the best ways for people to communicate with computers. But there was very little data on people who were using computers for communicating. So in January of 1994, he set out as a pastime to find out who was actually using the World Wide Web. And what started as almost idle curiosity has now become the world's largest collection of web data, now being updated every 6 months by Jim Pitko and Colleen Kehoe.
Sure enough, right, have this big spike in younger users over in Europe where we don't see.
The information they've been gathering highlights some curious differences in trends between internet use in North America and the rest of the world. Americans, for example, are 3 times more likely to own their own computers than Europeans. There are more married people than single people online in the States, yet in Europe it's just the opposite. They've discovered lots of other little differences on either side of the Atlantic, but in one area, the international web population is moving in the same direction. Everywhere, the demographics show that women are beginning to play a larger role than ever before.
Initially, when we ran our first survey, we had a 95% male population. And now we're finding more around 70. And the rate at which that is changing itself is increasing. So we're rapidly getting into a more gender-balanced population. Additionally, when we look at differences between the populations of the male versus female, the differences aren't that great. We find more differences between US users and European users than we do between male and female users. So even though there may be a little bit of imbalance, we're not talking about any major difference between the two populations that we can see in our numbers. And this is very encouraging.
It's also a fact that internet migrants aren't poor, huddled masses. In fact, according to the Atlanta research, arrivals to the internet are quite an affluent crowd. Average income of around $69,000 in the US, over $53,000 in Europe. Just what the advertisers want to hear, and they can hear it from Jim Pitko for no charge. While other pollsters scour the net and charge a healthy dollar for their findings, Pitko and Kehoe put their information about the web back on the web for free. And while they've had a couple of offers to take their work to the business community, they claim they have no ambition to commercialize the survey.
I mean, that's a big part of the reason we get such a positive response from researchers and everybody is because we do it, you know, in our spare time for fun, sort of.
Right, if you could call it that.
Yeah.
The other notion here, though, is the web is a community, and their surveys are a public service to the web community. And we never want that fundamentally to change. Part of the notion here is that if the cost of access to good information is expensive, then you're kind of crippling the adoption of this technology. And if you provide reasonable numbers for free, then you actually increase the adoption of this technology because you provide a valuable service, like we do, to the web community for the web community. After all, they're the people who filled out the surveys. Why shouldn't they have access to this? It's their data.
And if data is what you want, data is what they've got. Did you know, for instance, that there are more Americans with university degrees who use the web than Europeans? Although in Europe there are 3 times as many PhDs. Go figure. But perhaps the most important trend that Pitko and Kehoe have observed is that the character of the web population is changing. We're no longer just the geeks who hung out in computer labs. The image of the web user has been altered forever, and Jim Pitko didn't have to go through a lot of data to reach that conclusion.
The first image I had was basically looking to my left in this computer lab and seeing who was there. And now I get a different notion of somebody in their household, you know, actively using the web to look at information, to see what's out there, to have fun. And it's a much more enjoyable picture. It's a picture that actually has longer-term success built into it. And it's also a picture that paints a very nice future for society and for the web.
Mr. Pitko's right, for the true destiny of the internet is going to be found not in computer labs, but places like this, in rural Nova Scotia, where the Bowlby family are actually using the net in their day-to-day lives. Whether it's looking for a job, teaching the kids, or keeping in touch with a sister who has moved away. To get to the Bowlby family home, you have to drive along world-famous Cow Bay Road as it follows the Atlantic coast until you pass the world-famous Cow Bay Moose on the Eastern Passage outside Halifax, Nova Scotia. Neil Bowlby, like a lot of other middle-aged men around here, lost his job recently when the local oil refinery closed down. There aren't many other jobs on the Eastern Passage these days. Mr. Bowlby has found himself passing the time on the internet.
I'm averaging close to 3 hours a day. It's just, one thing leads to another. When you log in, I usually go to the news section, have a quick look at some of the papers. I love to read the headlines. You've got them instantaneous. If it's released at 13:15, you can read it at 13:15, not the next day in the newspaper. So you're getting headlines and information as it's virtually happening, and that's good. That's faster than a newspaper. And you also have a wider variety. So where a paper is limited to, say, 20 pages, the information available on the internet is just so wide, it's unbelievable. Pick a topic and go look for it.
He's put his resume out online wherever he thinks there's a chance of work, and he checks the Canadian government's human resources site every day in case a job comes up. But so far, no luck. Although that hasn't stopped Neil Bowlby from trying to introduce his neighbors to the technology.
1 or 2 of them have computers, but they sort of sit in their basements and gather a little bit of dust. So when I show them something I've printed off, they're in total amazement. They know about the internet, but they have no idea how to access it. Now, I've had friends drop in, and I've tapped human resources so they could see who or what jobs were available that day, and they thought that was tremendous. But they haven't gone home and said to their wife, you know, we should get the internet, you know, or get involved. A lot of people are, at least in my age bracket, are not really into that. It's the younger generations, my son, my 2 daughters, and my granddaughter now. They're all computer literate, and they'll live with it. Whereas the older generation, they're still a little nervous, still a little shy. They're baffled and bewildered, and they don't have anybody to lead them. If I have a problem, I ask Terry.
In what is now typical of the way the internet is being spread, Terry Bowlby brought the concept home from the office and introduced it to her father. And then both of them helped Terry's daughter, Anne-Marie, pick it up. So all of a sudden, there are 3 generations of Bowlbys on the internet.
A lot of people like myself, I'm in a clerical field, but I'm on the internet. But it's introduced through work, and it's something you found valuable, so you started it at home. And I think a lot of women are doing that. They see it somewhere, or they're introduced to it somewhere outside the home, and they go and decide that's what they need at home. It says, "Hi, Anne-Marie. I just wanted to thank you for coming to my Tupperware party. Your donuts really hit the spot. I enjoyed mine very much. I also wanted to thank your mom for coming and bringing you. That was very good of her, don't you think?" We're having a lot of fun with it. Dad is using it for job searches. He's applied for a position in St. Croix. We never heard back from them, but it gave him an opportunity to apply. We also use a lot of coloring book pages for Anne-Marie. We print them off, and she has fun. It's something that we don't have to spend money on to go out and buy her a coloring book so she can have one picture. Oh, here we go. Animaniacs coming up. Mom found a group on there that is, it looks after Christmas ornaments. She has a collection in the attic. And it's a place where if she was missing one in a series, she could write to them and they could find it for her.
How Terry Bowlby and her mother, and now her daughter, use the net is heartening news even beyond the Eastern Passage. On the other side of the continent, in Carlsbad, California, Susan Estrada has been fighting for years to change the gender demographics of cyberspace.
Because, you know, I'm coming from an environment where I've been involved with computers for a long time, probably longer than most sane people are, which probably explains why I'm the way I am. But moms still really, especially people my age, you know, in that sort of 30 to 50 sort of something group in there, the baby boom age, women are really sort of still pretty content to allow their husbands to be the computer person, and not real. You know, when I talk to people, and I tell them what I do for a living, they say, "Oh yeah, that's what my husband knows about that stuff." You know, it just makes me nuts because, you know, I understand the power of this technology, and I understand that this is really where the future lies, and I hate to see women sort of just give that away to their husbands or their boyfriends or to any man, because it's going to be such an important factor in the long run in terms of jobs and success and all of the things that women have fought for over the last 20 years or so.
Susan Estrada's net qualifications are impeccable. In 1985, she was involved in connecting the National Science Foundation supercomputer network, which became the backbone for public access to the internet. She makes her living on the net by engineering, teaching, creating, and running a business. But Susan Estrada has recognized there's the potential here for a gender catch-22, where the majority of women won't come on until there is more stuff specifically for them, and there won't be more stuff for them unless they come on and create it.
I don't think there's anything you can really say to women that it's going to make them use the internet. What you have to do is provide them with things to do that are of value to them. And women, because they're so time constrained, generally speaking, you have to be really good stuff, right? So one of the things that I personally have started to do is work with schools in this area to get the schools hooked up to the internet. And as a parent, one of the things that you become aware of very quickly is the amount of interaction that you have with the school. You know, all these piles of papers come home, and you go through the piles of papers, and then you have to send them back. And you know, if you want to know how your child is doing in the classroom, trying to get in touch with the teacher is, you know, practically impossible because they have a weird schedule. And, you know, as a working parent, you also have a weird schedule. And so sort of that interaction between school and home is really a mom's job. And that's something where you can really, the internet can really bring a lot to the table, because the internet takes away all those time barriers. It takes away all that inconvenience so that you can just simply send an email to the teacher when you feel like hanging out there.
See you guys later. Go through the office, okay? Bye.
So those kinds of things are going to be really important, you know, giving women something to do that's of value. You know, when the pediatricians get online, we're going to be in great shape.
But while we're waiting for the pediatricians, the research indicates there's yet another category of virtual haves and have-nots beginning to become apparent. Between those who have the skills to write the hypertext markup language, which are used to create web pages, and those who don't. Among those who do have the skills is Terry Bowlby.
I'm learning to record in HTML, the hypertext markup language, and I've downloaded a lot of background information. Then I persuaded work to buy me a book.
By teaching herself hypertext markup language, Terry Bowlby's not only taking a step up the internet ladder, she's also becoming a statistic in Atlanta. They have noticed a huge increase there in the gap between people with the ability to publish on the web, those who can write HTML, and those of us who appear content to remain simply readers. So the web is actually becoming less interactive, and web users more like viewers than participants in the programming. Not at all what was originally forecast.
What initially started out as a technology to exchange information rapidly has now actually become a pastime. That's pretty surprising. It's definitely a different use and a different effect towards society than was initially intended.
The data tells us now that the net is attracting all kinds of different people who are actively moving into cyberspace and moving in, it appears, to stay.
I communicate with my sister probably 3 or 4 times a week at work and at home, sending a little quick note. It might be just say, call me on Friday, I have a quick personal question. Or it might be, so what do you want for Christmas, and send me your list. It just seems like it gives you a few more minutes to think rather than waste time on a telephone talking.
One of the big things now is that the access to the internet has increased. I can actually reach further out into the population and talk to friends, family, etc. that were never on it or never would be because they're not computer science related.
Yeah.
So now I can daily converse with family members as well as friends.
It's very strange getting email from your parents.
And then put Toy Story all one together. Yeah. My daughter learned how to turn the computer on when she was 3, much to my chagrin. She just would get on there and do her own thing, you know, and it was fascinating to watch her because as she was banging the keyboard to do things, she would actually find commands that would allow her, particularly in the little kid software, to do games and stuff. And I would watch her and think, wow, this is really great, you know, because who wants to read the manual? But she was able to figure that stuff out by herself. And I think the same thing was happening with the internet, is that you get people that were just sort of banging around on there and, you know, driving a lot of the developments that we've seen over the last 5 years in terms of, you know, making the internet a much more friendly place to hang out.
In fact, it's become such a friendly place that for many people, it started to replace television. At least, that's what the numbers say. In Carlsbad, California, Susan Estrada runs a company that creates internet directories, the white and yellow pages of the web. She also teaches classes on net access to small businesses and has found all kinds of entrepreneurs who want to expand into cyberspace, like the lady who runs a sperm bank for dogs.
You know, the sperm bank probably is my favorite example because, you know, I usually go around the classroom and make everybody say what they do, and this woman was sort of sitting very quietly in the back of the class and telling us what she did, and everybody kind of giggled, and it was really funny. But she did very high-end dogs, and so her clientele were numbered in about 1,000, and were all over the world, and had discovered the internet a number of years ago as a method of communicating back and forth. And so by the end of the class, she really recognized that, you know, once you look at the demographics and the ease of use and all those sort of things, that the internet really was a very, very good way for her to reach those very focused clientele who were already online. So for small businesses whose demographics are out there already, you know, if you know who your customers are and you know they're online, then it makes a huge amount of sense for you to be online.
So among all its other achievements, the net is suddenly finding purebred daddies for purebred puppies. It's changing the way we do a lot of things. In Atlanta, they want to know how it's changing your TV habits.
Question, which was, how often do you use your browser instead of watching TV, right? Mm-hmm. So let's see.
We don't watch near as much TV. I think that's where the big difference is. The net is making you stay on the computer longer. So, because Anne-Marie has her living books, she has her Aladdin game, and when she's on there, she will play, and she'll play for an hour. And that's an hour away from the TV, which I find is really helpful.
One of the new questions that we've been asking recently is how often they use the web instead of watching TV. And it turns out that there's pretty good use here of replacing a traditional form of entertainment with this newer form of entertainment. Additionally, we see that users are actively on the web on a daily, periodic basis. So this is very good as far as institutionalizing and internalizing the web into their daily routine. If they're on the web daily, this has a profound impact into their choices as to what they're doing and what they're not doing.
The internet is really turning into a consumer trend. It's not sort of an intellectual pursuit anymore. It really is a place to hang out and have fun. And because of that, because it's turning into what I call an infotainment vehicle, a place where you can find information, but you can also be entertained at the same time. It's a way for people to talk to each other, you know, all on the phone. It really is becoming a necessity as opposed to something that just only the rich people or the smart people can have. And I think as we move forward in society, we're going to find that the internet and whatever vehicle you use to get on it, be it your TV set or a computer, is going to be very much mainstream because it's going to be the vehicle that people use to communicate.
We do a lot of searches for specific things. Like we found the Dr. Seuss page, and we found the Living Books page. They're all directly related to things that Anne-Marie is interested in. And then I like country music, so I have found country music pages. And I think now that we've finished the exploratory phase, we're into the direct. We know exactly what we're looking for, so we just go out and look for it.
If you look at, like, for example, the Usenet news groups, I mean, there's just thousands, and they cover, like, every conceivable topic. I mean, it's not limited to actual people just interested in computers anymore. So, I mean, I read news groups about, you know, about computer things, but also about tea and horseback riding, and so there's people on those news groups who basically wouldn't have been involved with the internet in the same way.
So the research indicates that the net is well on its way to gaining general public acceptance. And internet veterans, like all travelers who've been struggling in the virtual wilderness for what seems a lifetime, now have trouble actually believing they finally arrived.
I think the biggest surprise that I've had personally was just how fast it turned into mainstream, because I feel like, you know, the TV evangelist, I've been talking about this stuff for forever, you know, and you know, 5 years ago you'd go into a crowd of people and you'd stand up and you'd say internet, and they'd all look at you like, what was that? And then trying to explain what it was, you'd say, well, it's kind of like an online service like CompuServe, but it's not CompuServe, and here's the difference. And it was so weird to most people. And all of a sudden, it's not weird anymore. You know, it's like everybody, well, not everybody's heard of it, but so many people have heard of it that it's just, you know, I still feel like I have to explain what it is, but I don't have to do that anymore. And to me, that's the part that's sort of stunning.
My mother, who's 74, doesn't understand anything about computers, and she knows that my sister, who's a school teacher, wants to go on the net. And she's decided at 74 that she wants to buy her a modem. So she doesn't know what it's all about, but our daughter in Toronto has actually picked it up for her, and we'll be bringing it down in a couple of weeks' time.
The demographics of the internet are important, not because they give us the numbers, but because they give us pictures of people. And it's only through learning from the changing habits of people that we'll be able to trace web development, not just in mass, but in usage. For as more people join the communities of cyberspace, the more important it will be to know what type of neighborhood they're moving into and what it is the net can provide. Only then will we know that the migration from the real to the virtual world was worth the journey, worth the adventure to go and find life on the internet.
If you'd like to take a closer look at your fellow Internauts, you might start here. The Internet Business Group is a good place to get statistics and link up with Internet researchers. You can check out a list of the 50 U.S. cities that have the most registered domains. Domain is a unique name that identifies a neighborhood on the Internet. Major Internet trends are important, but a little trivia can be fun too. The Internet Index is a collection of odd facts and figures. In December of 1993, there were 18 coffee houses online in San Francisco. In 1995, the number of former Venezuelan presidents under house arrest and using the internet was 1. Of course, there are more mainstream facts here as well. How many people surfed the net in the past 3 months, or the number of new sites added per day. Susan Estrada, who was in the show, is on the board of trustees for the Internet Society. This is the Internet Society website. You might want to take a spin on this global map to find out exactly which countries have access to the internet. And of course, we hope you'll stop by our site. It contains links to everything you've seen and a whole lot more. If you have access to the World Wide Web, here's how to find us. http://www.pbs.org. Until next time, I'm Scott Simon.
In a network of computers, it's not the MIPS and chips and whatnot that's most important. It's what goes on between the people using them that makes them really powerful. A reminder from Sun Microsystems, proud to support this PBS program.
This is PBS.